Yeah, we'll just go ahead and get started with this recording. I will be monitoring the chat box for folks that might have any questions along the way or any difficulties.
Good morning, everyone. Like Randy said, my name is Herb Hazenkamp. I'm the sales manager here at Denbest and Seed Company, or Dakota's Best Seed, and also an organic farmer. I'll be on the program a little bit later this afternoon, and so I'll share a little bit more about our operation then. But for right now, we have really three great speakers to touch on really some of the advancements. So I've been in organic production for quite a while, and it's really been interesting to see how fast the advancements have accelerated, the last 5 years in organic production. And so we're going to talk about some of those things today. And we have three speakers. We have Nic Podoll, who is a farmer and an organic crop consultant for the Rodale Institute. We have Danielle Kusner with the Andersons. She represents one of the companies that's supplying organic inputs that will sell to growers like yourself. And then, of course, we got Drew Foster here, who is our fertility and soil health expert here at Douglas Plant Health. So I think we'll start out with Nicholas. If we have you, there he is. I'm not tall enough. Need some stools. Good morning, Nicholas.
Morning.
Take a few minutes. Tell us a little bit about your role in your operation, and then we'll maybe jump into a couple questions that I have for you.
Sure. So I work for the Rodale Institute as organic crop consultant. I just started there in January. The rest of my team is, I got Sam Mulriat and Emily Newman that are in Pennsylvania at the headquarters there. And we also have Leah Barek, who's the other consultant in the Midwest with me, and she's based in Madison, Wisconsin. And I'm in Nevis, Minnesota, which is in the north central part of the state. And there's the rest of my team there. A little bit about myself. You can go to the next slide. I have a master's degree in Ag and Extension Education from North Carolina State. I used to work for NDSU Extension and also University of Minnesota Extension before I started working for Rodale. I'm IOIA certified in crops. I served several years on the NCR SARE Farmer Rancher Grant Review Committee. And then most of my organic experience, I grew up and farmed on a certified organic farm in southeast North Dakota, primarily growing small grains and vegetable seed. Some of you might have known me as a kid in the 90s running around all the organic conferences. I'm growing up now and this is what I'm doing. So some of you guys probably know my family. They run Prairie Road Organic Farm and Seed in Fullerton, North Dakota. So I was asked to talk a little bit about weed control in organic systems today, and some of the things that work really well. And I always say it really starts out with cultural control. You got to be doing these things well first in order for other things to work very well. So you want to be working on building your long-term soil health and soil structure. You got to have a good crop rotation. The longer and more diverse crop rotation that is, the better. And we're always working on different types of crop rotations that might work, and everybody's farm is different. And so you really have to find what works well for you and your soils. And that cover crops are integrated into that crop rotation. And I say integrated because they shouldn't be an afterthought. You don't just want to plant a cover crop after you've harvested a cash crop and not have a plan. It's to cover the ground, but they should be accomplishing something for you, building your soil health, helping with weed control, and maybe having some benefit for the next crop that's going to be growing there. So integrating those is really important in your rotation. You also want to have a vigorous crop stand that helps with weed control. So variety selection and having clean seed is really important. And then delaying planting when necessary. I always say that you want to err towards the side of planting late. Getting stuff in early is not always the best. Waiting until the soil temperatures have warmed up considerably and you can get your crop up out of the ground super fast really helps a lot. All right, next slide. So then you go into the mechanical control and tillage, and timing, I guess, is really critical in this. And timing, when I say timing, it's relative to your planting date, to the emergence of your crop, and also the growth stage of the crop. And then also the time of day, paying attention to when you're going out in the field and the soil conditions during different times of the day when you're going out and doing these operations is important. Spring tillage can be really important. It is for most systems, unless you're trying to do a no-till type of system. But killing weed flushes early in the spring, again, kind of maybe delaying that planting date so you can create a weed-free and uniform seed bed is important for most operations that I see in the Midwest. And then blind cultivation is something that a lot of folks have started doing now that seems to be working really well, either with a tine weeder or a rotary hoe. And that's getting those either before your crop has even come out of the ground, getting those weeds that are still like in the white thread stage when they're before that you can even see them with your eye. It seems to work really well. It's a little bit, it can be a little bit, I guess, I don't know, scary. I don't know, scary is the word for it or whatever, but going over your crop with something before you even really know what's there, but it seems to work really well for people. And then between row cultivation with your row crops later in the season, either with shovels and sweeps or using brush basket or finger weeders in between in some smaller operations seems to be working really well for some folks, especially like in vegetable operations and things like that, but also in some grain systems too. And then really this is organic no-till is really where a lot of the research, I guess, is going towards, and some of the more, advanced things that we're coming up with. And when we say no-till, it's really more of a reduced tillage or rotational tillage type system at this point. I don't know if anybody's really cracked the code for organic no-till yet. There's some people that are doing it successfully in different places around the country. But again, going back to those cultural controls, if they are doing it, they've been doing it for a long time, and they've created a system where they're doing all the cultural controls perfectly in order for them to be able to do the no-till. So that's why I talked about that stuff earlier. It might seem really basic, but it's really important to have that stuff down first before you can try anything new in order to be successful at doing anything new. Have to have that stuff down. So planting into terminated cover crops is kind of where we see a lot of progress right now. The most widespread success is with soybeans planted into roller crimped rye. We've been really successful at that at the Rodale Institute. And using the roller crimper, obviously our CEO, Jeff Moyer, was one of the inventors of that implement. And we've tried it at the Rodale Institute with corn as well, planted into roller crimped hairy vetch. That's been mildly successful. And I say mildly successful because it hasn't been able to be replicated as well in different places around the country. You can see the picture there. That's a stand that was at the Rodale Institute with corn planted into roller crimped hairy vetch. And it's worked okay at the Rodale Institute. There's some regrowth though, and then you never get 100% kill with the hairy vetch, and then you have some hairy vetch that's always kind of present in your system. And so that's a little bit of an issue at this point, and that's why I say mildly successful. But we have produced at the Rodale Institute some pretty high yielding corn crops through that type of planting. And then interseeding covers or planting into a living cover is something that is people are really playing with as far as being able to control weeds. They're working at that. Aaron Silva's been working on that a lot at the University of Wisconsin. They've been frost seeded clover and small grains is kind of a classic one that works really well. So I mentioned that in there, but some of the newer stuff that they're working on is interseeding rye or other cover crop mixes in a stand of corn. And they've even tried, planting the corn into a living stand and then using inter-row mowers to mow the middle and mow in between the rows. And that hasn't worked very well yet. But that's something that Dr. Silva's been working on at the University of Wisconsin. Spring planted non-vernalized rye with soybeans is something also that Dr. Silva tried and seemed to work pretty well. They had some pretty good yields on with their soybeans at the University of Wisconsin there. What happens is that rye has to be vernalized or exposed to colder temperatures in order for it to produce grain. So if you plant it in the spring and it's not exposed to any cold temperatures, it'll grow up and produce a cover in between your rows. But then once the soybeans canopy, it'll just die back. And it'll kind of produce sort of a mulch in the rows. And it's not quite as thick of a mulch as you would have like with a roller crimped rye cover crop. But it did keep the weeds down pretty well, and they had some pretty good yields with their soybeans doing that. And then looking at different equipment, I mentioned the inter-row mowers and the roller crimper, but using flame weeders and weed zappers has started to work pretty well for a lot of organic farmers over the last several years here. That's becoming more widespread use as well. But again, timing with those things is pretty critical, and they only work very well if you're doing all the little things right first, so that you're not trying to use these tools in a crop that's already overwhelmed with weeds. You're not going to be very successful doing that. So again, going back to doing the little things right first, you can try some of this new stuff and you might be more successful with it if you're doing those other things. So that's about what I have. If you got any other questions for me.
Nicholas, as you look at all the different options that you pointed out, is there one that you think has merit, that's maybe not being widely used today, whether it be crimping or inter-row seeding, that you seeing having additional merit going forward? It's going to be one that actually on a lot of acres.
I think the one that the different thing that I see that seems to be working the best is planting that non-vernalized rye in between the rows, planting it at the same time that you plant the soybeans. That worked really, really well. I see that as a pretty good option moving forward in places where maybe the roller crimping system is not going to work very well for you, because the thing that we found in the Midwest a lot of times with the roller crimping system is that the soil temperatures are just too cold, and it stays too wet and too cold underneath that mat of rye, and you just can't get the seed up out of the ground quick enough, which is pretty important. So I could see where planting that non-vernalized rye at the same time as soybeans, it seems to work pretty well, and I think that might be something that people might want to try more moving forward.
Great, I appreciate that. Yep, do you want to stand? Microphone. We got a question for you.
In the fall planted rye with the intention of either corn or soybeans in the spring where you roller crimp that, waiting until the soil is warmer and drier. Is there an advantage to having a legume with that fall planted rye so that you got some nitrogen production before you crimp it?
Yeah, I mean, you mean planting a legume after, like beans, after you've crimped the rye, or having?
No, if you're fall planting rye, like an open pollinated rye, what about putting a vetch with that, or a crimson clover, or a legume, a nitrogen fixing legume in with your cereal? That's, yeah.
Yeah, that works pretty well, actually. Rye and hairy vetch has been a pretty successful mix as well. That's something that my family's used on our farm before too, as a cover, as rye and hairy vetch mixed together.
Okay,
seems to work pretty well.
Great, thank you. All right, I think we'll shift and turn to Danny. You can hear us?
Yes, you guys can hear me okay?
Hey, good to see you.
Hi.
So I'd kind of like to do the same. Have you share a little bit about yourself and your role there at the Andersons. And then I think we talked a little bit beforehand about if you would share with us some of the latest advancements you've seen as far as organic fertility products available for us.
Correct, yeah. So is the screen share option working?
Yes.
Awesome. So I'm just going to get this pulled up. You guys can see that?
Yes, looks good.
Awesome. I am the student who procrastinated and did not get these submitted in time. So I'm glad this all worked. So hi everybody, my name's Danielle Kusner. Everybody calls me Danny. I'm a certified crop advisor with the Andersons. I serve as our organics manager and lead organic agronomist. The Andersons is a diversified grain business. We have 4 divisions. We have grain marketing, ethanol, rail, and then plant nutrient. And so I work with our plant nutrient group. We provide fertilizers in the organic space. We have had an organics program for about 4 years now. We've been working with Dakota's Best. Geez, guys, maybe going on a year now. We kind of met them last year and have been getting them familiar with our fertilizer options. The Andersons, we have a strong presence in kind of the Eastern Corn Belt, but we do have distribution and we even have production facilities out west, closer to you guys in Sioux City, Iowa, and Sergeant Bluff, Iowa. The next closest would be over in Wisconsin. So we're excited to break into the Dakotas with Dakota's Best. And I'm just going to jump into the 2 areas that Herb had asked me to talk about. So the first is kind of, if I'm thinking just really broad scale, like what is the biggest innovation in agriculture that's going to change, I predict, and the science and kind of market indicators are out there, it's going to change the industry in the next 5 to 10 years, it will be carbon. And this goes both conventionally and organic. So the value of carbon cannot be underestimated, especially in an organic production system. It is the base. Nicholas, previous speaker was kind of touching on this with those cultural controls and just doing all the little things right. You need to have the crop rotation, you need to have the cover crops, you need to have that living root on the soil, because that's feeding the carbon system, which is pushing the sugars down into the soil, feeding the microbiology, and the microbiology is then pumping available nutrients back up into the production of your crop. So this is essential in any agriculture system, but in organics, it's really essential based on some of the limits of the rules of the NOP rule of what we're allowed to use. So like I kind of mentioned, this is just another emphasis here. I would consider it the #1 nutrient. Most people, I'm going to talk about nitrogen next, and most people would think nitrogen's #1, right? But if you don't have your carbon taken care of, your nitrogen's not going to cycle and function as well. And I'm not going to touch on it. I mean, if you guys are interested, I have about an hour to 2 hour presentation that I can dive deep into carbon and humic acids, fulvic acids, basically just how that system functions. But this is all feeding into this last bullet point here in terms of the capture of atmospheric carbon. With the new administration, I mean, the reality of a carbon credit market and actually beginning to measure and have there be some accountability and then credits back to farmers for the amount of carbon that we're capturing in our soil organic matter is really exciting. I think it's really going to be implemented in the next few years here. So hopefully all the farmers in the room are aware of this. So if this is my biggest innovation, just wanted to share a little bit of data. We have several humate products. This Humic DG would be our flagship product. This is a granulated humic acid. So it looks like a fertilizer granular. It's just, we take the raw humate, grind it down to a fine powder, and then put it back into a pellet with a binding material. So this granulated humic acid is 70% humates. And in our trials, if you start by looking at the bottom line here, we've been running this trial in Wisconsin since 2017. The rate that's put out in furrow at planting, you could also do like a 2x2, but just very close to the row, was 10 pounds an acre. And so we averaged over replicated trials about 10 bushel per acre increase in those first 3 years of the trial. So what I did, right, is I took a gamble and I said, well, run it for a 4th year. And then my yield dropped only to about 8 bushel, 7.9 bushel increase in 2020 in that same trial design. So we think this is a pretty proven product, especially with prices of organic corn. You know, the retail value on this product to those increases of about 10 bushel, this is definitely paying off for itself. So we do have several other products. I'm not going to get into our whole product portfolio today. I just am really highlighting our leaders, and the Humic DG in the carbon category would be one I want to share with you guys. So then Herb's second question. Oh, I forgot I had biochar in here. Oh my gosh. So this is very new for us, and I did want to share it with you guys. We have begun to granulate biochar as well. And we're looking to increase production and actually increase all of our trial and innovation work around biochar. The difference between a humic acid and a biochar, the humic acid that we have granulated is available immediately in season for about the length of that season, influencing the soil organic matter profile. Whereas the biochar is longer carbon strains, and so they have a longer lasting impact and will last longer than that immediate year. More so in the range of decades than just one growing season. So last year, 2020, was the first time we trialed our Humichar. That's our brand name for granulated biochar. And you can see in our 2 sites, I mean, Wisconsin's probably the one more close to your guys's parallel of weather patterns, although I know it has different soils over there, but 8 bushel increase. Again, this was at that 10 pound rate, very exact same trial design as the Humic DG. So the second area that Herb had asked me to talk about was the nitrogen. And say carbon's number 1, nitrogen will probably be number 2, right? And the biggest limitations being in corn. But I want to stress, and I don't know how much you guys will hear it already, if not over the next, day and a half, is that the organic agronomy organic agronomy compared to conventional agronomy is not a 1-to-1 substitution. I mean, both systems are biological systems, but we rely on the biology a lot more in organics. So when I'm talking about nitrogen, I don't want to lead just with nitrogen. I want to, again, this is kind of getting back to some of Nicholas's points. I want to get back to the cultural controls and what we're doing in our overall management. So the necessity of rotation. I found the most success in nitrogen management when there's more than a corn soy rotation. in order to get enough nitrogen to that corn crop. If you lengthen the rotation with small grains, like an alfalfa or a couple years and, a pasture alfalfa system, as well as cover crops, that's really going to help there be more available nitrogen on the corn years. Sorry, I got to move my, move this here to see the words. So the carbon cycling, so the importance of carbon that I just mentioned is then going to help with the biology cycling our nitrogen. So once we can ramp up that biological system, the nitrogen that's in your soil profile, that's either there or is able to be captured from the air, that's going to be more efficient. And so the use of all those cultural controls, manures, rotation, and tillage, I just can't stress these enough when we're talking about nitrogen in the organic system. So then my third point, again, this is very simplified because we have short presentations here, but I consider, other than a base of rotation, cover crops, and manure use, nitrogen and organics, you're really supplementing with it. Primarily because we don't have that many options, but also, B would be because it is a large cost, and it's not like a conventional system where we're just going to buy all of our nitrogen credits and not actually get them from that functioning organic or not organic biological system. So I would say, yes, during years of transitions, yes, as you're ramping up your soil health, you're going to need to supplement with nitrogen. And then potentially in years of extreme weather, when you have a large rain event, we're going to want to apply additional nitrogen. But most organic farmers that I've heard that have been in it for a while, they have adequate nitrogen pools, their biology is functioning. And so it's only really in a really wet year, or if for some reason they're short between that V4 to V6 period, that they're going to come in and add additional nitrogen. So last year, in 2020, we began trialing Chilean Nitrate in replicated third-party trials for the first time. So just want to share this data with you, and this is what I have to end on. So we did two different timings. This was at planting, the rate of 100 pounds, and that provided these yield increases. You see, the placement is 2x2. You can't put Chilean Nitrate in furrow because it has a high salt index. So you have to get it, over and under the row, that 2x2 placement. And this additional yield bump was due to the Humic DG. So that carbon addition of nitrogen will help make more use of the nitrogen. So then this is our second timing. This is at that V4, V6, which I hear more questions from growers asking, how can I get nitrogen on later in the season? And all the rates here at the bottom were at 100 pounds. So these were not even really like precision placed or put close to the row. It was just the guys went through on their last tillage pass at V4, V6 on corn and just kind of broadcasted out there, just an over the top dress. And so you'll see these yield bumps, again, the additional yield bumps from the addition of either the Humic DG or the BioChar, Humichar being our brand name for the BioChar. And then so the previous two slides were dry. This Chilean Nitrate can be liquefied and kind of melts down just like urea when it's solubilized in water. And so for any people, any farmers that have, liquid capacity, you can melt the Chilean Nitrate down. And this was 100 pound rate put into water, and it had these yield increases. So we can have, the basis of the system, with good management practices, good carbon, good biological nutrient cycling. But we are seeing, at least from our 1 year of research last year at the Andersons, that, the addition of supplemental nitrogen does increase yield. So that's what I had to share with you guys this morning.
Okay, thanks, Danny. I would comment on the Humic DG. If you can imagine kind of a coarse salt granule, except it's solid black. That's a good visual for what Humic DG looks like. And so it's very easy to spread if you have, simple type spreader out there, easy to handle, just a very nice uniform product. Okay, well, we'll jump into our last speaker, which is Drew Foster. Like I said earlier, Drew is our fertility and soil specialist here at Dakota's Best. So I'll turn it over to him, and then we'll finish up with a few questions before lunch.
Okay, thank you. I have to follow up on what Danny just presented. It's kind of exciting for me to be working with Anderson's and with a great product line, and with Danny in particular, who we share our philosophy. I think when it comes to carbon is really important. Can't discount that, and the biology is really important. So let me just back up briefly and say that I've been working with biologicals for somewhat over a decade. I've got a degree in entomology, zoology, and a lot of background in agronomy. So even though these things weren't really what we specialized in or spent much time in when I was in college, I've come to understand working with growers that if we don't pay attention to the soil and the soil health, we're losing a lot of opportunity. And when it comes to organic farming, I don't think we have a choice. We've got to focus on the quality of the soil if we're going to be successful, and if we're going to grow a top quality product, and if we're going to leave a legacy for our children, and that is an improved soil quality compared to when we started. So Todd really opened up the perfect opportunity with his opening statements this morning, because he spoke about creation. And I don't think that we can do an adequate job unless we first acknowledge that God created the universe, he created the earth, he created the soil, he created it all very good. And then he commanded us to be good stewards over that. And if we go at our farming practices, especially organic farming, with that attitude, then our thought processes ought to go toward, well, how did God create this to work? And, God didn't tell Adam and Eve, well, wait 6,000 years and then, Monsanto and so forth are going to give you chemicals to make your life easier. No, he gave us everything we needed right from day one. We just need to be attentive enough to pay attention, to learn, to study, observe our crops through the season, and and work within both the materials that God gave us and the systems that he designed. And systems are critical to understand in this whole process. The biggest system, the big mechanical system that we all live under, I might say, is the sun and the earth. The sun rotates, it revolves, it tilts, it goes around the sun, it influences our seasons, temperature changes, and so forth. And we couldn't be farmers without that. In fact, there wouldn't be life on the earth without that. The systems that we're talking about today are microscopic, they're molecular, they're in the soil, and they're critical to efficient farming. There are plenty of farmers around my area in Nebraska that farm fairly sandy soils, and they farm with pivots, and basically they're farming 130 acre organic, or not organic, but hydroponic fields. That's the way I view it, because it's all about chemicals and water and no concern, essentially, about the biology, about the soil health. And we watch the quality of the soil degrade, and we see it more and more difficult to pull a profit out of that kind of a system. So maybe I'll touch on a couple of the specific things that we're working with, and these would be some fairly recent advances. That's our topic here. Nicholas talked about, in fact, he started with talking about the soil quality as far as weed management. And we all know in the organic farming realm that the most difficult things we have to deal with are nutrients and weed control. So he touched on the weed control right up front, or weed management, I should say. So I'll share with you that we have a product called MT17. This is something developed by Agri-Energy Resources, now Douglas Plant Health, and we work with them. MT17 is a biological, and we use that within a system. You know, I mentioned systems up front. They're all the things that we do are multifaceted. There's really nothing that I can say is standalone. So the MT17 system plays off of a natural system, and that is calcium. Sufficient calcium in the soil helps to ultimately aggregate clay particles and starts the building, the soil structure building process. The next part of the system would be carbon. We typically get sufficient quantities, significant enough quantities out of our manure applications. And then the MT17 itself is a biological. So we've got chemical, calcium and carbon, and we've got the biological. And those three working together will improve your soil structure. And in the process of the multiple benefits of soil structure, we also see benefits in weed management in the fields where we utilize this program. We have the opportunity to improve, inoculate the soil and improve the soil biology, boost the soil biology at planting time with seed treatments. We've got Myco Max and we have Myco Seed Treat. These are powders that would go on the seed. Depending on what you want to do, what your emphasis is going to be, we've got these opportunities. And I talked about choices right there. I mentioned choices. When it comes to selecting what we want to use as far as biologicals, and we're bombarded with ads for biologicals anymore, aren't we? How do we decide what we want to use? Well, it's a good thing to take a step back, observe our systems, observe our yields, our challenges, you know, what's been going on in our fields in the past, and think about what it is that we want to, what problem do we want to solve? What aspect of our operation do we want to improve? We need to start by asking questions before we decide what sorts of any input really we want to use. But it's real important with biologicals because they're not all created equal. You know, if you're choosing between Myco Max and Myco Seed Treat, for instance, you might want to take a look at the soil biology, what's existing, before deciding which one of those to use. We have shown lots of great success with SP1, which is a liquid biological that we can put in furrow with a starter. We can spray it over the tops of plants. We do that a few times in the course of the season, depending on what we're growing. Like if you're growing alfalfa and you're going for top yields and top quality, you might run that over the top of your crop, over the top of your alfalfa after each cutting. And SP1 is a liquid complement of biologicals, microbes, and the stimulants within that to help them get going. So we have the opportunity to boost the biology in our soil with these sorts of products. One that I find absolutely fascinating and have spent a fair amount of time in the field observing the benefits is called SPE 120. It's a biological. It's quite simply just one fungus. It's Bavaria bassiana, and that's a fungus that grows, it's taken up by the roots of a plant and it grows inside the plant. It acts as a biostimulant. It also provides some insect and disease resistance for the plant. Generally provides a better quality crop. And in particular, we're seeing this in grain where we're reducing the mycotoxins in the grain. And that's really important for organic growers who are going for premium prices for food grade products. I could go on. We have a long list of products, and those are a couple of the highlights that I see our growers embracing and that I've seen pretty exciting results with. And with that, maybe we should open up to questions.
Yeah, and I think Drew did a nice job. You know, if I take off my Denbeston hat and I put my farmer hat back on, today it's pretty overwhelming with all the different things that the industry is trying to provide to the organic industry. And I guess, you know, when I came to Denbeston, one of my goals was to help growers like myself and those of you in the audience to help sort through this. Because, you know, some products are probably very legitimate. They have very specific areas where they're going to help on your operation. And there may be products out there that aren't going to be able to do that. And we all know we can't be spending a lot of dollars on the things that don't provide a consistent return year after year. And so I hope you guys hold us, and ladies hold us accountable to make sure that we're only promoting the products that, you know, whether I've tried it physically on my farm or Todd's tried it on his farm or Drew's tried it in his garden. We know that we're seeing something positive from that product. And I want you to have the confidence that if we're promoting that product, that we're seeing that benefit, because there's plenty of them out there to promote. So I agree. Any questions out there in the audience? We've got a.
All right, I'm actually going to stop sharing this recording and see. I know we don't have a big audience today, but I thought, Nick, I see you're on the call. I thought if you could pop in on video, I have a couple of follow-up questions for you.
Yeah.
See if I can see you here. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. I remembered that you had a important podcast interview this morning. How did that go?
Yeah, good. We talked to the No-Till Farmer podcast this morning. My colleague Leah Barek and I, and talked about our consulting service at Rodale and transitioning farmers to organic in the Midwest. So hopefully that's going to be out, I think, sometime in May. So
Okay, awesome. I know one thing we talked about last time that I kind of started thinking about again when I was rewatching this recording was, you know, I know this time of the year you get a lot of phone calls of people who are just sort of exploring this idea of transitioning to organic. And, you know, I'd be curious if you could share, like, what's the biggest, like, the most common question you get on kind of the agronomy and management side from people exploring the idea of organic transition?
I think one of the more common questions I get as far as conventional farmers that are exploring organic is that they're already doing no-till. And so they're, you know, the bigger question they have is, you know, if I transition some acres to organic, how do I continue to do it no-till? And that is definitely a challenge. It's not easy to do because if you don't have the benefit of using some herbicides at some point, if you think about an organic system without any chemical inputs and without any tillage, you know, eventually that landscape is going to want to start returning to, you know, whatever its natural state is. And so you have to find ways, I guess, to try to control that. And so I guess, you know, with without any tillage or without the benefit of any tillage, it's pretty difficult. And I would say that, we have to have probably some tillage in there, but we try to make those events as light and as rare as possible within the system that we create on any specific farm. So I think there is out there an expectation that you can go in and transition to organic and have zero tillage and it's like I said, it's not something that's zero tillage is probably something that's not really possible at this point. So
Do you think, I mean, are you getting more of those kinds of questions just because, the benefits of no-till, or at least studies, showing the benefits of certain types of no-till systems have been mounting, and so there's just more news about it. And it's just kind of one of those things where we expect so much of farmers, you in the media you see, well, organic is good, well, no-till is good, so we want to do both, and that's like you were saying, in an ideal world. um do you have an example of a grower in kind of our region, sort of the upper Midwest, that you've worked with that has really been able to dramatically reduce tillage? I know we've talked about this a lot, and obviously getting folks to lengthen their rotation is one of the quickest ways, to potentially reduce tillage. But maybe can you give an example of an operation where you saw success with, dramatically reducing tillage inputs?
I think that the main success we've seen is if you're able to use the roller crimper and integrate rolling cover crops into your system. And like you said, a diversity in the crop rotation is important too. And having getting away from corn and soybeans as much as possible, as profitable as they can be. Getting away from those in an organic system is probably going to be the easiest way to reduce tillage. And so that becomes a little bit of a conundrum too. I don't have a specific grower that has, been successful with an entire system yet. There are certain crops and certain sequences of crops that have been successful, in research and on some farms. But in terms of creating an entire system, that's no-till and a long-term crop rotation or sequence, we're not there yet. We're still working on a lot of that stuff, and researchers are still working on it as well. But we have seen some success with with like putting a small grain after corn and before soybeans, so that we can get a nice cover crop of rye in there to roll down before we plant the soybeans in. But after that sequence, it becomes difficult. So you've got you've got those 3 years in there where you've got corn, small grain, soybean. But then after that, it becomes a little more difficult again in terms of trying to have a no-till system, because especially in the Midwest and in the upper Midwest, because we just don't have the time to, after soybeans, to really be able to get a good cover crop in still, to be able to continue in that type of a system. And so you almost have to have some tillage event after those 3 years in order to continue successfully. And that's where we're running up against that wall, and we have to continue to work on that. So
I've been really intrigued by some varieties of really short day soybeans out there. I've talked to a grower in East Central South Dakota who planted a shorter day soybean after rye. This is East Central South Dakota, and was still able to get some yield. I think maybe it was 10, 15 bushels. But if you are certified organic, that's that's still a pretty decent chunk of income. So have you seen anybody else playing around with these short day beans?
I think that's something that people need to continue to play around with a little bit more. I haven't seen, don't have an example of it personally that I know of, but that intrigues me too. I think that's something that we'd have to consider. And like you said, it's, if it's a reduced yield, if your goal, I mean, is to continue to, remain no-till, that may be a compromise that you might have to make in an organic system at some point. And financially, it's a little bit tougher of a decision to make, but if you can look at it at, over the long term, over the term of your crop rotation, however many years that is, and the longer the better. If you can sort of average out that, maybe a lower yielding year somewhere in the rotation, if you can sort of average that out over the longer term and look at it as an average over the per year over the term of your crop rotation, I think that's probably a little bit easier approach to make it a little bit more palatable. But kind of get away from looking at it so much from year to year. So, and that's part of, I guess, organic systems anyway, as we're looking across several years to try to plan things out. And so it's another little bit of a shift in mindset that might have to take place, I guess. So.
Awesome. Well, I'm just going to share my screen here really quick and do a really brief wrap up. Again, today we replayed a recording from our Organic Farm Team Summit back in early March. Yours truly is working hard at editing down a lot of recordings from that summit, and we will be continuing to make these available free of charge on our YouTube page. So stay tuned for those. And if you want to get notifications for when we make these recordings available, just subscribe to our YouTube page and you will get those. Just a couple of shots from our summit. We had a really good time. We had about 65 people there, growers and vendors alike. And I think we're planning on another event in late fall. So stay tuned for that. Again, we will be posting more recordings from our summit on our YouTube page. And we will be having a little bit less content for Fridays on the Farm going forward into late spring and summer. Since I also work for a seed company and this is a very busy time of year for us. But if you have ideas for topics, we're always open to those. I unfortunately couldn't get Danielle Kusner on the call today, but she was really interested in doing her own 1 hour presentation. So stay tuned for potentially more from Danny on Fridays on the Farm. Thanks for stopping in, Nick.
All right. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.